The morning fog clung to the streets of suburban Cedar Grove, casting everything in a muted gray haze. Mark adjusted his running shoes and set off on his usual jogging route, earbuds tucked firmly in, the rhythm of his sneakers on the wet pavement forming a comforting cadence. The air smelled of damp earth and pine, a familiar scent that usually signaled nothing more than another routine morning. But today, something felt different. As he rounded the corner near the small creek that cut through the woods bordering the neighborhood, a faint, high-pitched whine caught his attention. It was barely audible at first, almost swallowed by the soft patter of rain on leaves. Mark paused mid-stride, pulling out an earbud and scanning the area. The sound came again this time, more insistent, desperate, and undeniably real. His heart skipped. It was unmistakable. A puppy in trouble. Mark followed the sound, jogging carefully over slick stones and fallen leaves. He spotted a tiny shape, barely visible in the shadow of a storm drain, water lapping around its small body. The puppy's fur was matted and soaked, slicked down against its trembling frame. Its eyes were wide with fear, reflecting the gray morning like two tiny pleading mirrors. It yipped again, a soft, pitiful sound that made Mark's chest tighten. Without thinking, he dropped to his knees, careful not to startle the creature further. The puppy flinched at his shadow, but didn't run, as if it understood that help had arrived. Mark reached down slowly, his fingers brushing the slick fur. "Hey there, little guy," he whispered, voice gentle but firm. The puppy whimpered and recoiled slightly, but the hunger for warmth overcame fear. Mark stretched his arms into the drain, feeling the icy water seep through his sleeves as he coaxed the trembling animal toward him. It was a struggle. The puppy, tiny and terrified, kept trying to scramble back, slipping on the muddy edges of the drain. But Mark was patient, talking softly, letting the pup sense safety rather than force. Finally, with a careful tug and a lot of persistence, he lifted the small creature into his arms. Relief flooded through him as the puppy's body went limp, exhausted and drenched, resting against his chest. Its little heartbeat fluttered like a trapped bird, frantic but slowly calming under the warmth of Mark's embrace. He climbed out of the drain, soaked to the bone and muddy from head to toe. His clothes clung to him uncomfortably, but the discomfort didn't matter. The puppy's shivering had slowed, its cries replaced by tiny whimpers. Mark pulled off his jacket, wrapping the pup tightly against him. "You're okay now," he murmured. "I've got you." As he stood there, hugging the trembling creature, Mark's eyes caught movement in the shadows of the woods bordering the creek. At first, he thought it was a stray dog, maybe the puppy's siblings, but the shapes were too large, too coordinated, and they moved with a deliberate, almost predatory grace. His stomach clenched. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, a pair of glowing eyes stared back at him. He froze. The puppy whimpered and nudged his chest, sensing his tension. Mark exhaled, forcing himself to stay calm. He had read about animals' sensitivity to human fear, and he knew panicking could provoke a dangerous encounter. Still, the eyes didn't blink, didn't shift. Mark scanned the tree line and saw four more pairs, each reflecting the dim morning light like small lanterns. Wolves, real wolves. A shiver ran down his spine. Instinct screamed at him to drop the puppy and run, but something held him rooted. The creatures weren't advancing aggressively, but neither were they retreating. They circled the area, silent, their bodies low and controlled. Mark felt a mixture of fear and awe. He had never been this close to a wolf in the wild. Stories, documentaries, even trips to wildlife preserves had prepared him intellectually, but nothing prepared him for the raw intensity of being observed by such intelligent predators. The puppy, oblivious to the danger, snuggled closer into Mark's chest. Its trust was absolute, and something in Mark responded. He couldn't just run. He couldn't abandon this tiny life again. Not now. He shifted slightly, holding the pup higher, and spoke in a soft, steady voice. "I don't want any trouble," he said. "I'm not here to hurt you." The alpha wolf, slightly larger and darker than the others, stepped forward. Its eyes locked with Mark's, a piercing, intelligent gaze that seemed to look straight into his soul. Mark's heart pounded. He tried to remain calm, taking slow breaths, resisting the urge to make sudden movements. The alpha sniffed the air, nostrils flaring, then slowly moved back, sitting on its haunches like a judge passing silent judgment. Mark realized something extraordinary. The wolves weren't here to attack, they were assessing. Their circling movements, the pauses, the silent communication among the packet was a ritual, a complex language he could barely understand. The puppy, he suddenly noticed, wagged its tiny tail. It recognized them. It belonged to them. Relief mingled with awe. He hadn't rescued an abandoned pup. He had rescued a member of a pack, and now he was in their domain. His mind raced. He thought of stories he had read, tales of wolves attacking humans who encroached too closely. Yet these animals were not attacking. They were curious, protective, and surprisingly patient. Mark knew his next moves would define the encounter. One wrong step, one loud exhale, and the delicate balance could tip. He gently laid the puppy against his chest, careful not to make sudden motions, and slowly backed away from the drain. His eyes never left the alpha. The pack followed his movement, matching it perfectly, a living, breathing shadow. Every instinct in him screamed danger, but every rational thought told him to remain calm. And he did. By the time he reached a slightly clearer patch of ground, the rain had lightened to a drizzle. The puppy's small body had relaxed against him, trusting him completely. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the wolves retreated back toward the tree line. Mark exhaled audibly, tension leaving his body in a rush. He had survived his first close encounter with wild predators, and had done so not through strength, but through patience, respect, and careful observation. Mark continued home, drenched and muddy, but filled with a strange exhilaration. His morning run had turned into something far beyond routine. It had become a confrontation with the wild, a lesson in courage, and a reminder of the fragile connection between humans and nature. And somewhere in the forest behind him, the pack watched, ensuring the safety of their youngest, silently acknowledging the human who had proven himself worthy of trust. As Mark opened his apartment door, the puppy still trembling slightly in his arms, he knew his life had changed. Today wasn't just about saving a tiny, helpless animal. It was about discovering his own capacity for calm under pressure, his empathy, and his respect for life's untamed beauty. He glanced down at the puppy, whose eyes now sparkled with curiosity and mischief, and whispered, "You and I, buddy, we're going to need each other." Mark's apartment smelled of damp clothes and wet fur, but he hardly noticed. He sat on the edge of his worn sofa, the rescued puppy nestled in his lap, shivering but slowly warming to his chest. He stroked its fur gently, whispering reassurances, but his mind kept drifting back to the woods. The alpha wolf's gaze, sharp and intelligent, haunted him. Something about that look had pierced straight into his instincts, leaving a lingering unease he couldn't shake. He knew he couldn't just leave it there. The puppy wasn't an abandoned stray. It was part of something bigger, something dangerous but beautiful. A wolf pack living just beyond the edge of the city. And somewhere deep in his heart, Mark realized he wanted to understand, to witness that world. By late afternoon, the rain had eased to a light drizzle. Mark decided he needed more information. He packed a small backpack with essentials, a water bottle, a flashlight, a few sandwiches, and some notebooks. He left his apartment quietly, careful not to disturb neighbors. In his heart, he carried both excitement and apprehension, knowing the woods were waiting, watching, and judging. The creek was swollen from the morning rain, muddy water flowing faster than usual. As Mark approached, he noticed the familiar paw prints in the soft mud, a trail that led deeper into the dense forest. The puppy, sensing familiarity, tugged gently at its makeshift leash. Its tiny energy was contagious, pushing Mark forward despite his nerves. Entering the forest felt like stepping into a different world. A canopy above filtered the waning sunlight, casting eerie patterns across the underbrush. Every sound was amplified, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of a bird, the soft gurgle of the creek. Mark moved carefully, aware that the wolves were near. He had no idea whether they would attack, observe, or vanish entirely. Suddenly, movement caught his eye. 5 wolves emerged from the tree line, stepping lightly over roots and rocks. Their coats were dark, glistening from the rain, muscles rippling beneath their fur. Mark froze, instinctively shielding the puppy with his body. The wolves didn't advance aggressively, but they circled him, their eyes locked on both him and the puppy. Every step they took was measured, deliberate, like a dance rehearsed countless times. Mark's heart raced, fear and fascination colliding in a powerful surge. One wolf, slightly larger than the others and darker, stepped forward. It was the alpha. Its gaze pinned Mark in place, unwavering, calculating. Mark remembered reading that eye contact with predators could be interpreted as a threat. He lowered his gaze slightly, careful not to show fear, but not submissive either. He was walking a tightrope between respect and danger. The puppy whimpered, peering up at Mark, as if asking what to do. Mark's hands were steady, but adrenaline coursed through him, making his fingers tremble ever so slightly. He spoke softly, using a calm, even tone. "I mean no harm. I just want to help." His words felt absurd. He was speaking to wolves, but somehow he sensed they understood his intent. The alpha wolf paused, nostrils flaring as it sniffed the air. The other 4 wolves fanned out behind it, forming a protective semicircle around the puppy. Mark realized the pack wasn't aggressive. They were cautious and territorial, testing him. One misstep could provoke them, but one careful, patient move could allow him to coexist, at least temporarily, in their space. He slowly lowered the puppy to the forest floor, ensuring its tiny body remained calm. The alpha's eyes never left him, but there was no rush, no sudden movement. The puppy hesitated, and took a few tentative steps toward the larger wolf. The alpha nudged it gently, then looked back at Mark, almost approvingly. Relief washed over him, but the tension lingered. He was still surrounded by 5 wild wolves, each one a lethal predator if provoked. Mark decided to sit, lowering himself slowly to appear non-threatening. He kept his movements smooth, deliberate, and steady. The alpha tilted its head slightly, studying him, before lying down a few feet away. The other wolves relaxed, some lying on the damp forest floor, others sitting with ears pricked. The puppy curled against the alpha's side, clearly at home. Mark's chest tightened with awe. He was witnessing a social dynamic few humans ever saw firsthand. Minutes stretched into hours. Mark observed silently, notebook in hand, jotting down every detail. The alpha's behavior, the pack's movements, subtle signals like tail flicks, ear positions, and vocalizations. The forest was alive with energy, each creature aware of every sound and scent. He realized how intricate wolf communication was, a language of gestures, tones, and timing. The puppy was part of it, integrated seamlessly into the pack's structure, and Mark understood the delicate balance of trust required for his presence to be tolerated. As he observed, he noticed subtle signs of pack hierarchy. The alpha occasionally nudged another wolf, asserting dominance without aggression. A smaller wolf brought a piece of food from a distant bush and placed it near the alpha, an offering, a sign of respect. Mark's fascination grew. It was like watching a miniature society, perfectly organized, intelligent, and self-sufficient. The puppy scampered around, testing boundaries with the other wolves, rolling in leaves and yipping excitedly. The pack tolerated it, guiding gently, correcting occasionally with a nudge or low growl. Mark smiled, recognizing that the puppy's energy brought life to the group, but that structure and order were never compromised. It was a living lesson in balance, patience, and cooperation. Mark glanced up at the tree line. The forest seemed to lean in, listening, observing, almost protective. Every sound, from dripping water to distant bird calls, was amplified in the quiet tension of the forest. He felt acutely aware of his vulnerability, but also of his privilege. He had been allowed into this intimate, dangerous world, and his responsibility was to respect it. As evening approached, the light dimmed, filtering through the dense canopy in thin, golden streams. The wolves began moving as a group, heading deeper into the forest. The puppy followed closely, occasionally glancing back at Mark. His pulse quickened. He could either follow or retreat. He knew following too closely could provoke aggression, but leaving felt like abandoning a bridge he had just begun to cross. With careful steps, Mark mirrored their pace at a respectful distance. A forest floor was slippery and uneven, roots twisting like serpents underfoot. Every step required attention, not only for his own safety, but to avoid startling the pack. The wolves moved with effortless grace, powerful and coordinated, a living testament to evolution and instinct. Mark felt both humbled and exhilarated. Night fell slowly, bringing with it a thickening mist. The wolves paused at a small clearing by a pond, the water reflecting the dim light of the sky. The alpha lay down near the edge, the others fanning out strategically. Mark stayed at the edge of the clearing, careful not to approach too closely, but close enough to observe. The puppy curled into the alpha's side, eyes heavy with exhaustion. Mark's heart swelled with relief and admiration. It was then that he noticed something remarkable. The alpha was not just watching the puppy, it was watching him. Its gaze was intense, intelligent, almost questioning. Mark understood without words. The pack was assessing him, determining whether he was a threat, an ally, or someone unworthy of trust. And in that moment, he felt a profound connection, not just to the puppy, but to an entire world that existed on the edge of human perception, wild and untamed, yet governed by rules of respect and loyalty. Mark exhaled slowly, feeling a calm he hadn't experienced since entering the forest. He realized he was witnessing something extraordinary, a rare glimpse into the intelligence, loyalty, and complexity of a wolf pack. Every movement, every glance, every interaction was a lesson in patience, courage, and respect. And he knew, deep down, that this was just the beginning of an adventure that would change his understanding of life, trust, and the wild forever. The forest had grown quieter as twilight deepened, the dim light filtering through the dense canopy in muted, shifting patterns. Mark remained frozen, aware that the wolves' gaze tracked him relentlessly. Each movement, no matter how slight, seemed amplified under the alpha's unblinking eyes. He could feel the weight of 1,000 judgments, the silent evaluation of his intentions. His chest tightened with a mixture of awe and anxiety. He was no longer merely an observer. He was part of the pack's unfolding drama, a character in their carefully choreographed dance of trust and instinct. The puppy, sensing the tension, whimpered softly, pressing against Mark's chest. Its tiny body radiated warmth, a stark contrast to the chilling air in the shadows of the forest. Mark stroked the puppy's head gently, trying to convey calm, though his own heart raced uncontrollably. He knew that any sudden movement could provoke the alpha's attention in a dangerous way. Every instinct in his body screamed for caution, but he forced himself to stay still, breathing slowly and evenly, praying his calm would be perceived as respect rather than fear. Then, without warning, the alpha wolf rose, muscles rippling beneath its glistening coat. Mark froze, unsure whether the movement was a threat or a test. The wolf's eyes never left him, analyzing every micro-expression, every breath. Its pack mirrored its behavior, the others shifting subtly, tails low but not aggressive, ears pricked in unison. The synchronization was mesmerizing, a visual symphony of living power. Mark realized that these were not mere predators, they were sentient beings, intelligent, strategic, and deeply aware of hierarchy. A low growl rumbled from the alpha, resonant and controlled, vibrating through the clearing. It was neither anger nor fear, it was a warning, a subtle assertion of dominance and expectation. Mark understood that he was being tested, assessed for intentions, strength, and respect. He exhaled slowly, lowering his gaze, yet holding a posture of cautious confidence. The puppy's tiny paws twitched, as if sensing the tension between the two intelligent beings, its own body caught in the gravity of the moment. The alpha circled slowly, each step deliberate, every movement measured. Mark remained seated, back straight, hands visible and still. He noticed the subtle signals the alpha communicated to its pack, a flick of the tail, a subtle ear twitch, the position of the head. The other wolves responded immediately, shifting positions, fanning out to maintain a protective semicircle around the puppy. Mark's mind raced to comprehend the intricate social dance unfolding before him. It was more than instinct. It was communication, strategy, and silent understanding. Time seemed to stretch, every second dragging into eternity. Mark observed the alpha's behavior, noting the tension in its shoulders, the precise movements of its paws on the leaf-strewn forest floor. He realized that the wolf's intelligence rivaled that of a human, though expressed in gestures, postures, and subtle sounds rather than words. The alpha's eyes never wavered from him, yet there was a strange sense of recognition, a careful acknowledgement of Mark's presence, his intentions, and his respect for the pack. Finally, the alpha stopped circling, sitting down with a controlled grace that radiated authority. The other wolves mirrored its movements, lying down but keeping alert. Mark remained seated, tension coiling in his muscles, yet a sense of cautious relief began to seep through him. The puppy nestled into the alpha's side, sighing softly, completely at ease. Mark realized, with a mixture of wonder and disbelief, that he had passed the first silent test. His respect, patience, and calm had earned him a tenuous trust. Mark began to take notes, documenting every subtle motion, every flick of tail and shift in posture. He observed the pack grooming each other, communicating in ways subtle enough to escape untrained eyes. It was a symphony of loyalty and precision, a hierarchy maintained without aggression, yet underscored with the potential for lethal force. Every gesture mattered, every decision held weight, and Mark understood that his survival and the puppy's safety depended on his continued mindfulness. Minutes passed like hours, and the forest seemed to hold its breath. A distant bird call echoed, and a soft rustling in the underbrush reminded Mark of the perpetual presence of life in the woods. The alpha's gaze flicked toward the sounds, but never left him completely. Mark realized that he was now part of this environment, his fate intertwined with the pack's decisions. It was a profound, humbling experience, one that forced him to confront his own assumptions about dominance, trust, and coexistence. The puppy yipped softly, testing the boundaries of its temporary safety. The alpha nudged it gently with its snout, asserting control without aggression, a lesson in patience and discipline. Mark watched closely, understanding the importance of subtlety. The wolves operated on principles far beyond simple instinct. They maintained a social order, communicated complex emotions, and enforced boundaries with a delicate, precise balance. The puppy was learning from them, and so, inadvertently, was he. As the shadows deepened and the forest grew darker, Mark felt a shift in the atmosphere. The alpha rose again, pacing slowly in a deliberate arc. Mark remained seated, the puppy secure in his lap, and tried to remain composed despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. Each step of the alpha was calculated, every glance measured. Mark realized he was not merely observed. He was studied, evaluated for decisions he hadn't even consciously made. Survival in this environment demanded more than courage. It demanded awareness, patience, and understanding. Suddenly, the alpha stopped directly in front of him, nose twitching as it sniffed the air around Mark. The puppy whimpered lightly, sensing the intensity of the interaction. Mark held his breath, remaining still, yet aware that every micro-expression, every blink, was under scrutiny. Then, without warning, the alpha lowered its head slightly, a gesture Mark interpreted as acknowledgement, a silent, cautious approval. It was not friendship, but it was recognition. He had earned the right to exist in their presence without immediate threat. Mark exhaled quietly, allowing relief to mingle with awe. He realized how rare this opportunity was, how few humans had ever been allowed this level of access to a wild wolf pack without provoking aggression. He felt both humbled and honored. The forest, once intimidating and alien, now seemed alive with subtle communication, a network of signals and meanings just beyond the limits of ordinary perception. The other wolves remained alert, watching Mark with cautious curiosity, but the tension had eased slightly. The alpha settled near the edge of the clearing, tail curling around its body in a position of controlled dominance. The puppy, reassured, nestled close and began to doze. Mark stayed still, silently observing, taking notes and reflecting on the delicate balance between predator and human. Hours passed in this tense, but mesmerizing standstill. Mark understood the forest in a new way, not just as a collection of trees and wildlife, but as a living system, governed by rules of loyalty, trust, and instinct. The alpha had tested him, the pack had watched, and the puppy had guided him into their world. He realized that his actions, patience, and respect had earned him a fragile but undeniable place in their reality. As night fell fully, Mark decided it was time to retreat. He slowly rose, careful to remain calm and non-threatening. The alpha's eyes followed him, steady and unyielding. Mark backed away, keeping the puppy secure, and observed the pack's reactions. The wolves shifted slightly, but did not advance, their eyes tracking every movement. He realized that trust was fragile, but possible. By remaining respectful, he had navigated the first, most dangerous test. Mark finally reached the edge of the clearing, heart racing but calm, and glanced back. The wolves remained in their positions, silent sentinels in the dark forest. The puppy yipped softly, but did not resist. Mark understood that he had earned a measure of respect enough to observe, enough to coexist, at least temporarily, in their world. With one last glance at the alpha, Mark turned toward the path that would lead him home. His mind was alive with adrenaline, awe, and a profound understanding of what it meant to earn trust in a world governed by instincts sharper than any human law. He realized that the forest, the wolves, and the tiny puppy had just taught him a lesson he would never forget. Survival demanded patience, observation, and respect, and sometimes, courage was measured not in confrontation, but in stillness. Mark moved slowly through the forest, careful not to make sudden movements that might provoke the wolves. The puppy, now more confident, trotted alongside him, pausing occasionally to sniff at wet leaves or watch a bird flit overhead. Mark's heart swelled with a mix of awe and caution. He had survived the first tense encounter, but he knew the alpha's judgment was ongoing, subtle, and relentless. This was not a creature to be tamed. This was a guardian of its world, intelligent, observant, and unyielding. As he walked, Mark noticed how the pack moved through the woods, graceful, precise, every step deliberate. They didn't run or chase him, but their presence was constant, bordering on protective. The alpha often paused to watch him from a distance, eyes tracking every subtle motion. Mark realized that the alpha was not only aware of his presence, but also reading his intentions, almost like a teacher testing a student. The puppy, oblivious to danger, frolicked around leaves and puddles, but Mark understood it was learning as much as he was absorbing lessons about loyalty, trust, and the pack's social structure. At one point, Mark stopped near a moss-covered boulder, setting the puppy down gently. He knelt to scribble notes in his journal, recording the wolves' subtle interactions, the tilt of a head, the flick of a tail, the way the alpha positioned itself to maintain control without aggression. The alpha watched him intently from a distance, then moved closer, walking with a silent, fluid grace. Mark remained still, letting the wolf approach, and felt his heart pound as the massive creature stopped just a few feet away, nose twitching, eyes sharp but not hostile. The alpha circled the puppy, nudging it gently, and returned its gaze to Mark. It was a moment of fragile acknowledgement, as if testing whether he understood the unspoken rules of this world. Mark exhaled slowly, keeping his posture non-threatening. He understood that this was a rare opportunity, a silent dialogue with one of nature's most intelligent predators. The alpha's eyes held a depth that Mark couldn't fully comprehend, a mixture of caution, intelligence, and, surprisingly, curiosity. Mark extended a hand slowly, palm down, not expecting the wolf to respond, but signaling respect. The alpha sniffed the air near his hand, then backed away slightly, still observing. It was a subtle interaction, yet Mark felt it was significant. The wolf was testing him, gauging his patience and understanding. Mark realized that earning trust in the wild was not about dominance or aggression. It was about calm, awareness, and respect for boundaries. The puppy, sensing the tension, sat close to Mark, nuzzling his hand. Its small, warm body radiated trust and innocence. Mark felt a surge of responsibility. This little creature had led him here, and he couldn't fail it, not now, not after witnessing the complex, intelligent dynamics of the pack. He spoke softly, reassuring the puppy while keeping his tone even and calm, hoping the alpha would interpret it as non-threatening. "We're not here to harm anyone," he whispered. "Just observing, learning, and keeping you safe." The alpha moved again, slowly approaching Mark's side and sitting, leaving a respectful distance between them. The remaining wolves fanned out in a semicircle, keeping the puppy protected. Mark marveled at the precision, the silent communication that guided every movement. He realized he had stumbled into a living, breathing classroom of instinct and intelligence. The forest was not merely a backdrop, it was a participant, a silent observer, guiding interactions with subtle cues of light, sound, and movement. Time passed, and Mark began to relax, sensing the wolf's acceptance. He dared a small smile, and in response, the alpha tilted its head slightly, as if acknowledging him. It wasn't friendship, not yet, but it was a bridge, a tentative connection that could grow if nurtured. Mark felt a deep sense of humility. He was not here to dominate or control. He was here to witness, learn, and respect the delicate balance of the pack's world. As evening descended, the forest took on a golden glow, the last rays of sunlight filtering through the trees. The alpha rose and approached closer to the puppy, who barked softly and ran circles around it, full of energy and confidence. The wolf nudged the puppy gently, then turned to Mark, letting him see the mutual trust that had formed in these few hours. It was subtle but unmistakable. The alpha was teaching, and Mark was learning. Mark realized that this connection was transformative. The wolf pack had tested him, evaluated him, and granted him a cautious trust. He understood now that true courage was not measured by physical strength or bold actions, but by patience, observation, and respect for the natural order. The puppy's safety depended on this fragile understanding, and he would honor it. Suddenly, a rustling sound came from deeper in the forest, and the pack's ears pricked. The alpha moved with precision, circling the area while keeping Mark and the puppy in view. It wasn't a threat, it was vigilance, a demonstration of the pack's responsibility and awareness. Mark understood the lesson. Trust must be maintained through consistent, respectful behavior. One misstep could undo hours of careful observation. Mark settled on a large tree root, letting the puppy curl against his side. He observed the pack's interactions, noting how the alpha guided the others, maintaining order without overt aggression. Each subtle motion had meaning. Each glance carried weight. The forest itself seemed to hold its breath, participating in the delicate equilibrium of predator, prey, and observer. Mark felt privileged to be part of this rare, intimate world. As night fell fully, the alpha lay down near the puppy, while the other wolves settled around him. Mark remained seated, understanding that he had been given a rare opportunity to witness and partially integrate into a wild, intelligent, and fiercely loyal social structure. He realized the pack's actions mirrored principles that humans often overlooked: communication, trust, and respect were more powerful than dominance or fear. The forest grew quiet, save for the soft rustle of leaves and distant calls of nocturnal creatures. Mark stayed still, observing, taking notes, and reflecting on the lessons of the day. The connection he felt with the alpha and the pack was subtle but profound, a bond based not on ownership, but on mutual understanding. He had earned a place in their presence, however temporary, and the experience left him humbled, exhilarated, and forever changed. Hours later, as the moon rose above the canopy, Mark realized it was time to leave the clearing. He slowly rose, careful to maintain a calm, non-threatening posture. The alpha's gaze followed him steadily, and the other wolves remained alert but passive. The puppy nuzzled him, reluctant to move, but understanding that this was part of the rhythm of life in the forest. Mark backed away slowly, glancing once more at the alpha. The wolf's eyes reflected a silent acknowledgement, a final lesson in trust and respect. Mark turned toward the path leading home, heart pounding but mind calm. He understood that this experience was not just about saving a puppy. It was about connecting with a world that operated on principles far older and more refined than human laws. He had been tested, evaluated, and granted a fragile but undeniable trust. And as he stepped through the shadows toward his own world, he carried with him a profound understanding. Courage, patience, and respect could open doors to experiences most humans would never imagine. The morning sun filtered weakly through the thick canopy of the forest, painting the ground with dappled patterns of gold and green. Mark awoke on a mossy patch near the clearing. The puppy curled beside him in a light doze, still soaked from yesterday's rain. He had spent the night under the shelter of a leaning tree, wrapped in a borrowed tarp and shivering blankets from his backpack. The forest was alive with songbirds chirping, insects buzzing, leaves rustling, but there was no fear. Only observation, awareness, and the steady rhythm of life surrounding him. He watched the alpha wolf, now fully awake, moving among the pack with precise and careful movements. The other wolves responded instantly to subtle cues, a flick of the ear, a tilt of the head, a low growl. It was mesmerizing to witness the communication of this tightly knit unit. Mark realized the pack's social order mirrored human systems in many ways, yet it was governed by instinct, intelligence, and mutual respect rather than rules or written law. The puppy stirred and yipped softly, hopping to its feet and darting toward the alpha. The wolf nudged the pup gently with its snout, reminding it of boundaries. Mark noticed the balance of discipline and affection, a lesson in leadership he had never understood fully before. Authority did not require fear. It required attentiveness, patience, and an acute awareness of those being led. Mark jotted down notes furiously, careful not to miss the subtle dynamics at play. He spent the morning moving carefully through the clearing, observing the wolves as they patrolled their territory, sniffed the underbrush, and occasionally raised their heads to survey the surrounding forest. Each wolf had a role. Some were scouts, others were guardians, and the alpha maintained oversight without appearing forceful. Mark began to see the patterns, the rhythm of their movements, the careful attention to hierarchy, and the ways in which the pack ensured the safety and training of its youngest member, the puppy. At one point, a small disturbance rustled in the underbrush, deer bounding past too quickly for Mark to follow. The wolves froze briefly, then resumed their positions. It was a controlled response, a demonstration of alertness and restraint, rather than impulsive aggression. Mark realized the lesson was clear. The pack survived not through raw power alone, but through discipline, coordination, and understanding. Every member had a purpose, and every action was measured. Mark decided to take a careful step forward, keeping his hands visible and slow. The alpha wolf's eyes followed him, unblinking, assessing every nuance of movement. Mark spoke softly, not to the wolf, but as a reminder to himself. Patience, observation, respect. He understood that every detail mattered. One misstep could be dangerous, but one thoughtful action could reinforce the fragile trust he had begun to earn. He offered the puppy a small piece of food from his backpack, watching as it eagerly gobbled it up. The alpha observed closely, sniffing the offering, then turning to the puppy and nudging it gently, as if approving the gesture. Mark realized the wolves were teaching him as much as the puppy, demonstrating trust and hierarchy, lessons about balance and coexistence in a world where every action had consequences. Hours passed. Mark followed at a respectful distance as the pack navigated through a dense thicket toward a small stream. The water ran clear and fast, and the wolves moved with fluid, coordinated grace. The puppy learned quickly, imitating movements, responding to gentle corrections from the alpha, and testing its own strength and limits. Mark marveled at the intelligence and patience involved in this teaching process. The alpha never raised its voice or showed overt aggression. It simply guided and corrected with subtlety and consistency. Mark began to reflect on his own life. How often had he rushed, demanded results, or overlooked the subtleties of human interactions? The forest and its inhabitants were showing him something deeper, that patience, observation, and respect often yielded better results than force or domination. The lessons he was witnessing were not only about survival in the wild, they were lessons applicable to every aspect of life. By midday, the pack had reached a sunlit clearing where they often rested. Mark observed as the wolves groomed one another, an intimate display of care and trust. The puppy clumsily attempted the same, nudging and licking the alpha, who tolerated it patiently, occasionally correcting it with a gentle nudge. Mark realized the social bonds within the pack were built on loyalty, care, and consistency. The alpha's authority was unquestioned, yet it was rooted in protection and guidance rather than fear. Mark took a small break, sitting near a large tree and scribbling notes. His body was sore, wet, and muddy, but his mind was alive with fascination. He had never imagined that a simple act of rescuing a puppy could evolve into an education in courage, empathy, leadership, and survival. The forest had become a classroom, the wolves his teachers, and the puppy his bridge into their world. As the afternoon progressed, Mark experimented with subtle interactions. He placed a small rock near the puppy, observing how it would react and how the alpha would respond. The puppy pawed at it clumsily, then looked to the alpha for approval. The alpha nodded subtly, signaling tolerance and guidance. Mark understood that learning to read these subtle cues was critical. It was not about dominance. It was about communication, trust, and awareness. At one point, a loud crack echoed from deeper in the forest, a fallen branch or perhaps a hidden animal. The alpha's head snapped up instantly, ears pricked, muscles tensed, yet no aggressive action was taken. The pack fanned out slightly, scanning, assessing. Mark held his breath, aware that his heartbeat might betray him. But the alpha returned to the puppy, signaling calm and control. Mark realized this was a lesson in vigilance. Trust could exist alongside caution, and courage often meant measured awareness rather than impulsive action. By late afternoon, the sun had moved lower, casting long shadows across the forest floor. Mark noticed the subtle rhythms of the pack's day, the balance of play, rest, vigilance, and teaching. The puppy had learned much in these hours, its energy tempered by guidance and correction. Mark understood that this structured freedom was a model of natural order, and that respect for boundaries created trust, not fear. Mark reflected deeply as he observed the alpha lying beside the puppy, eyes half closed but alert. The pack moved around them with calm precision, a living lesson in coordination, leadership, and protection. He realized that life, much like the forest, required awareness, respect, and adaptability. By saving the puppy, he had entered a world governed by instincts more ancient and refined than human laws, and he was learning to navigate it not as a conqueror, but as a participant. As evening approached, the alpha stood and moved closer to Mark, sniffing the air around him. Mark remained calm, careful not to make sudden movements. The puppy followed, yipping softly, and curled against him once more. The alpha's gaze held steady, intelligent and assessing. Mark felt a quiet acknowledgement pass between them, a subtle recognition of his understanding, patience, and respect. Mark knew he had been transformed. The forest and its inhabitants had taught him lessons about courage, empathy, leadership, and the delicate balance of life. By observing, respecting, and learning, he had earned the fragile trust of a wild pack. And as he watched the alpha nuzzle the puppy, he realized that heroism wasn't always measured by action or intervention. It was sometimes measured by awareness, restraint, and the ability to honor the natural order. As the forest grew darker, Mark prepared to return to a temporary campsite, careful to maintain the trust he had earned. The alpha and pack remained alert but non-threatening, a silent testament to the lessons of patience, observations, and mutual respect. Mark understood now that every action, every glance, and every step mattered. Survival and trust were earned through understanding, not force. Sitting by a small fire he built, Mark watched the puppy curl into a ball, exhausted yet content. The forest seemed to hum with quiet life, the wolves' presence a constant reminder of the delicate balance between human and wild. He reflected on the lessons learned today, understanding that these experiences were rare, transformative, and humbling. And deep in his heart, he knew that he would never see life or himself the same way again. The first light of dawn barely pierced the dense canopy, casting a soft, muted glow over the forest floor. Mark stirred, careful not to wake the puppy nestled against his chest. The events of the past 2 days had left him exhausted yet exhilarated. He had not only rescued a tiny, terrified puppy, but had also survived an encounter with a wild wolf pack and begun to understand their world. Every instinct, every action, every subtle movement had been a lesson in patience, observation, and trust. He gently placed the puppy on the ground, watching as it stretched and yawned, then trotted to the alpha wolf, who had already risen and stood surveying the clearing. The pack moved as one, each wolf assuming its role effortlessly, displaying a fluid coordination Mark had never witnessed before. Even after days in the wilderness, he was still awestruck by the intelligence, grace, and discipline of these wild animals. Mark took a deep breath and rose slowly. Today, he knew he would leave the immediate territory of the pack. He had learned enough to appreciate the delicate balance between human curiosity and the wolves' need for undisturbed space. One misstep could jeopardize the trust he had painstakingly earned. Every muscle in his body tensed with anticipation and respect as he made his first cautious step away from the clearing. The Alpha's eyes followed him, unblinking, piercing, yet calm. Mark realized that trust was not granted permanently. It had to be maintained through consistent, respectful behavior. He adjusted his pace, slow and deliberate, letting the Alpha judge his intentions. The puppy bounded along, playful yet obedient, occasionally pausing to check on Mark, a silent bridge between the human and the wild. As he walked, the forest seemed to awaken around him. Birds chirped cautiously, insects stirred, and the rustle of leaves reminded him of the ever-present life surrounding him. Every sound and movement held meaning, and Mark observed with heightened awareness. The wolves were a living reminder that the world was far more intricate than the routines and distractions of city life allowed him to perceive. After several minutes, he stopped near a shallow stream. Kneeling to refill his water bottle, he glanced back. The Alpha had paused at the edge of the clearing, its body poised and watchful. The rest of the pack fanned out slightly, maintaining a semicircle around the puppy. Mark felt a surge of gratitude. These animals, whom most would fear, had allowed him access to their world, had taught him lessons in leadership, patience, and respect, and had even accepted him as a cautious observer. Mark continued, mindful not to break eye contact with the Alpha too abruptly. He realized that the departure would test both his patience and his ability to maintain the fragile bond he had established. The pack mirrored his movements, shifting slightly as he walked, never aggressive, yet never fully relaxed. It was a silent negotiation, a careful dance of understanding between species. He paused near a cluster of ferns to jot notes in his journal. The Alpha wolf stepped closer to the puppy, nudging it gently as if offering reassurance. Mark realized the significance of this act. The puppy was learning boundaries, trust, and the lessons of the pack, while he, too, was learning from the structure, discipline, and wisdom embedded in every movement of the Alpha. Hours passed as Mark navigated the forest edge, occasionally stopping to observe the wolves' interactions. He noticed how the Alpha communicated with subtle gestures, a tilt of the head, a flick of the ears, a controlled shift in posture. The pack responded instantly, a demonstration of their intricate social system. The puppy followed these cues, learning rapidly, playful, yet disciplined. Mark understood that he was witnessing not only survival in action, but the education of the next generation in an ancient, instinctual language. By midday, the sun rose high enough to filter through the trees in golden streams. Mark paused on a fallen log, giving the puppy a small piece of food. The puppy scampered happily to the Alpha, who observed, then nudged it gently in acknowledgement. Mark scribbled notes furiously, capturing the subtleties of the interactions. He realized that every gesture held meaning, that the Alpha was not merely a leader but a teacher, and that patience and respect were the ultimate forms of communication. Mark continued to follow the pack at a safe distance, learning more about their daily routines, hunting instincts, and vigilance. He noted how they moved with purpose, every step calculated, yet capable of instant response to environmental changes. Even simple actions, such as shifting positions or grooming, carried lessons about hierarchy, loyalty, and trust. The forest itself seemed to support their structure, offering shelter, sustenance, and pathways in a carefully balanced ecosystem. By late afternoon, Mark reached a clearing that marked the edge of the dense forest. He knew this was where he would part ways with the wolves, at least temporarily. The Alpha's eyes met his one last time, steady, intelligent, and unyielding. It was a gaze that conveyed both acknowledgement and warning. Respect the bond, honor the lessons, and do not return recklessly. Mark nodded silently, understanding the depth of the communication. The puppy bounded around him, playful yet obedient, seemingly aware that this was a transitional moment. Mark knelt, embracing the small creature, feeling the warmth of its fur and the steady rhythm of its heartbeat. He whispered softly, "We've learned a lot, buddy. You're part of something bigger now, and we'll honor it." The alpha watched closely, its posture relaxed but alert, as if judging whether Mark truly understood the significance of the bond he had formed. Mark began to back away slowly, careful to maintain a non-threatening stance. The alpha followed at a distance, occasionally nudging the puppy to keep it nearby. The rest of the pack fanned out slightly, maintaining a semicircle, a living buffer that conveyed both protection and evaluation. Mark realized this was their way of teaching him the final lesson. Departure could be as instructive as presence, and trust was ongoing, not static. As he reached the edge of the forest, Mark turned for one last look. The alpha remained in the clearing. The puppy pressed close to its side. Their eyes met, a silent acknowledgement passing between species. He understood that this experience had changed him irrevocably, not just his understanding of wolves, but his perspective on trust, leadership, patience, and the delicate balance between human and nature. Walking toward the path that led back to civilization, Mark felt a profound sense of gratitude. The forest had become more than a setting. It was a teacher, a sanctuary, and a reminder of the power of observation and respect. The wolf pack had not only guided the puppy's development, but had also imparted lessons that Mark would carry for the rest of his life. By evening, as the city lights flickered in the distance, Mark emerged from the forest muddy, tired, but profoundly changed. The puppy trotted alongside him, eyes bright and alert, a symbol of the bridge between human curiosity and the wild. Mark knew that the lessons of patience, observation, and respect would stay with him, shaping his choices, relationships, and understanding of the natural world. He paused on the edge of the city, glancing back toward the dark line of trees. The alpha and its pack were gone from sight, but their presence lingered in the rhythm of the forest and in his heart. Mark understood now that true courage, wisdom, and trust were not earned through force, but through awareness, empathy, and patience. The forest had taught him that, and he would never forget it. That night, as Mark sat in his small apartment, the puppy curled at his feet, he reflected on the journey. He had entered the forest as a rescuer, uncertain and cautious. He left as a student of life itself, humbled by the intelligence, loyalty, and discipline of creatures most humans never truly understand. And somewhere deep in the woods, the alpha watched, silent and vigilant, knowing that a bridge had been built fragile, yet enduring. The city was alive with its usual cacophony, the honk of car horns, chatter of pedestrians, and distant rumble of trains. Mark's boots splashed through puddles left by the early morning drizzle. The world beyond the forest felt chaotic, almost alien, after days of quiet observation and the disciplined rhythm of the wolf pack. He carried the puppy in his arms now, whose energy seemed uncontainable, yet there was a newfound confidence in its movements. The puppy's playful nips and yips reminded Mark of the lessons he had learned: patience, vigilance, and trust, principles that transcended the forest. As Mark navigated the crowded streets, he sensed the stark contrast between human and wild instincts. People hurried past, distracted, unaware of the world that thrived silently in shadows and hidden corners. He realized that life outside the forest required its own version of awareness, not in terms of survival against predators, but in understanding human behavior, danger, and opportunity. Each step through the city was a test, mirroring the subtle assessments of the alpha wolf. The puppy squirmed and yipped, tugging at Mark's coat. He gently set it down on a small patch of grass outside a convenience store, allowing it to explore cautiously. The small dog sniffed curiously at trash cans, discarded wrappers, and the occasional passerby. Mark watched intently, knowing that even here, lessons from the forest applied. The puppy had learned boundaries and observation. Now it would have to navigate the chaotic energy of humans with caution. Suddenly, a group of stray dogs appeared from a nearby alley, barking aggressively and circling the puppy. Mark's heart leapt. Instinctively, he crouched low, trying to shield the puppy while remaining calm. He remembered the Alpha's teachings. Dominance without aggression was key, presence was protection, and careful assessment determined outcomes. He spoke in a soft, steady voice, hoping to project authority without provoking fear or hostility. The puppy froze, ears back, eyes wide. Mark stepped slowly between it and the approaching strays, chest forward but movements measured. The stray dogs sniffed the air and hesitated. Mark kept his gaze steady, channeling the calm awareness he had learned from the Alpha. Slowly, the aggressive postures softened. One of the strays tilted its head, unsure. Mark remained unmoving, silent, letting his composed presence speak. Minutes passed like hours. Then, almost imperceptibly, the strays backed off one by one until the path was clear. Mark exhaled slowly, relief mingling with awe. He realized the lessons of the forest were universal. Patience, confidence, and understanding of subtle signals could avert conflict. He picked up the puppy, brushing it gently as it barked nervously, and continued toward the edge of a nearby park, knowing the city held its own hidden rhythms. The park was quiet compared to the streets, a thin strip of green amid concrete and asphalt. Mark allowed the puppy to explore, guiding it gently while observing its instincts. The puppy sniffed and pawed at the ground, occasionally glancing back at Mark for reassurance. He saw the blend of wild confidence and learned caution in its behavior. This small creature had survived the forest, earned the trust of the Alpha, and now was learning the unpredictable ways of human territory. Mark paused near a bench to rest, observing the park's ecosystem. Pigeons pecked at crumbs, squirrels darted between trees, and joggers passed by, oblivious to the subtle dance of survival unfolding beneath their feet. Mark realized the lesson extended beyond wolves or puppies. Life was a series of interactions governed by observation, patience, and adaptability. The skills learned in the forest applied here too, if he chose to see and respect the world around him. A sudden noise shattered the calm of a skateboard rolling violently down a slope, narrowly missing a pedestrian. The puppy yipped and leapt back, startled. Mark knelt quickly, soothing the creature and speaking in gentle tones. He realized the chaotic, unpredictable nature of the city demanded the same awareness he had cultivated in the forest, but with humans as the unpredictable elements. Trust, vigilance, and calm would be tested in unfamiliar ways. As afternoon stretched on, Mark reflected on the bond he shared with the puppy. The little creature had transformed under his care and the guidance of the Alpha, playful yet disciplined, curious yet cautious. Mark understood that his role was both protector and student, learning alongside the puppy the nuances of communication, empathy, and respect. He scribbled notes furiously in his journal, capturing observations he knew would be invaluable later. Suddenly, the puppy bolted toward a bush, ears perked, tail wagging. Mark sprinted after it, his heart pounding. The bush concealed a hidden alley where a stray cat hissed and arched its back. The puppy froze mid-step, unsure whether to advance or retreat. Mark's mind raced, recalling the Alpha's guidance, presence, patience, and calculated action. He approached slowly, projecting calm confidence. The puppy hesitated, then backed toward him, signaling that it trusted his judgment over instinct alone. By evening, Mark had guided the puppy back to a small patch of grass near his apartment. The sun dipped below the skyline, casting long shadows across the streets. Mark sat down, exhausted yet invigorated by the day's lessons. He watched the puppy settle, breathing steadily, and reflected on the remarkable journey from forest to city. The world outside the woods demanded new skills, but the principles remained the same: patience, respect, observation, and trust. A sudden noise from a nearby trash can startle them both. Mark's instincts kicked in immediately, heart racing, yet he moved with controlled calm. The puppy glanced up, then returned its attention to him, demonstrating the trust it had placed in his guidance. Mark realized the lesson. Trust was reciprocal, fragile, and required constant reinforcement. The Alpha's teachings were not confined to the forest. They applied universally, even in the chaotic, unpredictable environment of the city. Night fell fully, and the city lights flickered on, illuminating puddles and wet sidewalks. Mark and the puppy walked slowly toward his apartment, side by side, a growing team of two beings navigating a world that demanded awareness, adaptability, and courage. Every shadow, every sudden movement, every unexpected sound was a test, a reminder that vigilance and trust were inseparable. Back at the apartment, Mark set down the puppy's small bowl of water and food. He watched the little creature eat with enthusiasm, a symbol of resilience and adaptability. Mark's heart swelled with pride and humility. He had saved the puppy, earned the trust of a wild pack, and now was learning how to guide it through an entirely new world. The journey had been a profound lesson in courage, empathy, and the delicate balance of trust across species and environments. Sitting on his worn sofa, Mark reflected on the past week. The forest had taught him patience, observation, and respect for the natural order. The city had tested his ability to apply those lessons in a chaotic, human-dominated environment. And the puppy had been both student and teacher, a living bridge between wild instincts and learned behavior. He understood now that courage and wisdom were not measured by bold actions alone, but by awareness, empathy, and the ability to adapt while respecting the rules of those around you. As he looked down at the sleeping puppy curled at his feet, Mark knew the journey was far from over. The bond he had formed with this small creature and the lessons imparted by the alpha wolf would guide him in the challenges ahead. And deep in his heart, he felt a growing sense of purpose, to honor the trust he had earned, to protect the puppy, and to carry forward the wisdom of the forest into a world that often forgot the power of patience, respect, and understanding. The morning light streamed through the apartment window, illuminating the small room where Mark sat at a cluttered desk. The puppy sprawled lazily on the floor at his feet. Weeks had passed since their extraordinary encounter with the wolf pack, yet the lessons of the forest remained vivid in Mark's mind. Each day, he observed the puppy, now growing stronger and more confident, reflecting the intelligence, caution, and playfulness that the alpha wolf had nurtured. The little dog had transformed from a frightened, trembling pup into a spirited, disciplined companion. Mark reflected on the journey that had begun with a simple act of compassion rescuing a vulnerable creature. That moment had led him into a world he had never imagined, where instinct and intelligence intertwined, where trust was earned through patience rather than force. He marveled at how a single act could ripple into an entire life-altering experience, connecting humans and wild animals in ways that transcended words. The puppy yipped and nudged his hand, demanding attention. Mark smiled, crouching to pet it gently. The puppy responded with a playful nip, tail wagging furiously, then darted across the room to chase a stray beam of sunlight. Mark watched with a mixture of amusement and admiration, noticing the lessons the pup had internalized: caution, observation, and the ability to adapt while still enjoying life. It was a living embodiment of the forest's teachings. Later that morning, Mark took the puppy to a nearby park, a familiar place where he had tested its ability to navigate human chaos. Today, the puppy moved confidently, alert yet playful, occasionally looking back to check in with Mark. They encountered joggers, cyclists, and even a stray cat. Each interaction was a minor test, and the puppy handled them with composure. Mark observed silently, pride swelling in his chest. He realized that the bond between them, forged through shared experience and trust, had strengthened beyond what he could have imagined. As they walked along a sun-dappled trail, Mark's thoughts returned to the alpha wolf. The lessons he had learned in the forest, the importance of calm, observation, and respect, had guided him not only in managing the puppy, but in navigating his own life. He had approached challenges with greater patience, evaluated situations more carefully, and recognized the value of subtle communication and empathy. The wolf pack had left an indelible mark on his understanding of leadership, trust, and courage. Suddenly, a loud noise from a nearby construction site startled the puppy. It froze mid-step, ears back, eyes wide. Mark knelt quickly, speaking softly and offering reassurance. "It's okay. We've got this." The puppy relaxed, returning to his side. Mark realized that both he and the puppy had internalized the forest's teachings. Courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act wisely in its presence. Trust was reciprocal, built through consistency and care. As the day wore on, Mark and the puppy explored the city with renewed confidence. He noticed people looking curiously at the small dog, unaware of the remarkable journey it had undertaken. Mark's heart swelled with gratitude for the experience that had connected him to the wild in such a profound way. He understood now that heroism was not measured by grand gestures, but by the quiet acts of observation, patience, and guidance that built trust and fostered growth. Returning home, Mark set the puppy's food and water bowls down and sat on the worn sofa. The puppy curled up beside him, eyes half closed, breathing steady and calm. Mark ran a hand along its soft fur, reflecting on the lessons that had transformed both of them. From the tense standoff in the forest to the controlled interactions in the city, every challenge had reinforced the principles of respect, observation, patience, and trust. These lessons were no longer abstract. They were lived experience, woven into the very fabric of their daily lives. As evening descended, Mark prepared a small meal for himself, while keeping a watchful eye on the puppy. The city outside buzzed with energy, but inside the apartment, there was a profound sense of peace. The forest's wisdom lingered in every subtle movement, in the puppy's alertness, in Mark's own calm awareness. He realized that the bond between them had become a stabilizing force, a reminder that life's most meaningful lessons often came from unexpected sources. Later, as darkness fell, Mark opened his journal and began to write. He documented every nuance, every observation, every lesson learned from the alpha wolf and the pack. He reflected on the journey, the tension and fear, the awe and wonder, the patience and trust. Each entry was a tribute to the forest, the pack, and the puppy that had brought him into this extraordinary world. Writing was a way to honor the experience, to solidify the wisdom he had gained, and to ensure he never forgot the delicate balance of trust and respect. The puppy stirred, hopping onto Mark's lap, eyes bright and inquisitive. Mark laughed softly, running his hands through its fur. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" he murmured. The puppy responded with a soft yip, tail wagging, as if acknowledging the journey and the bond they shared. Mark felt a profound sense of completion. The fear, tension, and uncertainty of the forest had given way to understanding, companionship, and mutual respect. In the following weeks, Mark continued to integrate the lessons into daily life. He remained vigilant during walks, observing the environment with heightened awareness. He paid closer attention to people and animals alike, recognizing subtle signals and respecting boundaries. The puppy thrived, displaying a unique blend of playfulness, caution, and intelligence that marked the influence of both the wild pack and Mark's guidance. Each day was a continuation of the forest's teachings, a living testament to the power of trust and patience. One evening, Mark took the puppy to the outskirts of the city, where a patch of trees offered a reminder of the forest they had left behind. He knelt, letting the puppy explore while keeping a watchful eye. The little dog paused, ears twitching, tail wagging slightly, as if sensing echoes of the alpha wolf. Mark smiled, understanding that though they were far from the wild, the lessons and bonds of the forest remained embedded in their lives. The puppy had grown strong, confident, and wise beyond its years. As night fell, Mark returned home, the puppy curled at his feet, exhausted but content. He reflected on the journey. A simple act of compassion had led to an extraordinary adventure, teaching lessons that transcended species, environment, and circumstance. He had learned that courage, trust, and respect were not abstract ideals. They were lived experiences, nurtured through patience, observation, and empathy. And in guiding the puppy, he had discovered more about himself than he ever could have imagined. Mark knew the forest, the pack, and the puppy had left a permanent mark on his life. The lessons would continue to guide him in moments of challenge, uncertainty, and decision-making. The bond with the puppy was a constant reminder of the extraordinary journey they had shared, a living testament to the power of patience, trust, and the subtle wisdom of the natural world. As he drifted off to sleep, the puppy nestled against him. Mark felt a profound sense of peace. The journey that began with fear, uncertainty, and the roar of wild instincts had culminated in trust, understanding, and companionship. The wolf pack had tested him, taught him, and left him transformed. And now, with the puppy by his side, Mark knew he had carried the forest's lessons into a world that often forgot the power of patience, awareness, and empathy. The city outside was restless, but inside the apartment, there was calm, trust, and the enduring bond between human and animal. Mark whispered softly, "We've made it, buddy, together." The puppy yipped softly in response, tail wagging, eyes bright with life. It was a small affirmation, yet it carried the weight of an extraordinary journey. A journey of courage, trust, and the enduring power of connection across worlds.